I am co-facilitating this session today with Simon Villeneuve. We're both joining you from Canada. I am a member of the staff at the Canadian Association for the Performing Arts, and Simon is a Wikimedia veteran working with La Cogency, a consultancy based in Montreal. Today, we wanted to talk about a recurrent issue that we have in the performing arts, which is the problem of conflation, items conflating two P31 values, two instances of values that shouldn't be appearing in the same item. So I'll begin with a brief overview of the issue as it presents itself in the performing arts, and then we'll open up the floor for a conversation. We don't have a minute taker for this session, so if someone wants to volunteer to take minutes, please go right ahead. That would be lovely. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded, including the chat. So there are frequent conflation issues in the performing arts. The most frequent problem that we are seeing is items that are being stated as an instance of both a cultural venue or a building and an organization. And I've got an example here, Théâtre de Katsu, which I looked at a couple of times, trying to figure out which statements I would send to which item and how I would unentangle it, and it's still there because I find it's just a puzzle to untangle. We also have less frequently, and that's less of a problem, items that are being stated as both a festival event and an organization. Less frequent, less big of an issue. But we're not the only ones with these problems. Like we have been talking about conflation since the beginning of WikidataCon, and there's a link to a database report highlighting some of these conflation in the database of Wikidata. So why is this a problem? First of all, because some properties, inception in particular, can relate to both the organization and the building. So we find ourselves with items that have two different inception dates. And of course, it's possible to look at the reference to find out which one refers to which. But then when you're attempting to process that information automatically, that doesn't work. Then a building may have different owners or different operators over time. Not possible to state that if they're conflated. The building or the venues may change names over time. Again, hard to manage that if you have a single item conflating the two. But in my opinion, the biggest issue arising out of that is the fact that we have external identifiers that are matched to the same Wikidata item, but that don't refer to the same entities. And that is sending wrong signal to the entire web of data. And that is a real problem. And when you're trying to sort out which identifiers refers to which entity, I don't know if you've ever tried that, but in the GND, the German database, I speak some German, but not enough sometimes to really make sure that a specific identifier refers to either the venue or the building. Or sometimes in some databases, there's just, or some base registers, there is simply no disambiguating information at all, which is another problem, but that's theirs, not ours. So what are potential solutions to this problem? Of course, I mean, we can add users instructions, but who really reads them anyway? We have found that users instructions in the performing arts have not yielded much of a difference in terms of people changing their behavior. So if you have the hours to spare, you can add users instructions. They don't hurt, but they don't really help. We have been thinking within our group about allowing one-to-many relationships between Wikipedia and Wikidata, because as we all know, many cases of conflation come from Wikipedia articles that are themselves describing to different entities. That would be great in terms of maintaining inter-wiki links as we disentangle items, but that would not really solve the source of the problem. You know, a new Wikipedia article conflating different entities would still result in a Wikidata item being automatically created and describing these two entities. So I'm going to list all of the potential solutions, and then we can talk about each one rather than stopping there, because I don't think this one holds a lot of potential. Another thing that we discussed was, could we create an exclusivity constraint saying that an instance of a given class can only be an instance of that class or subclasses of it, but no other classes? Is this not too radical a solution? Could it lead to false positive constraint violations? Hard to say. We have not really explored it. It's just an idea that we came up with. But the one thing that we think would really, really help is a new type of constraint that would trigger a violation, a constraint violation warning as soon as a Wikimedian states that a given item is an instance of two values that we believe are conflicting, that shouldn't be ascribed to the same item. And to do that before the Wikimedian starts adding more statements. So I don't think to resolve the problem at the source. Of course, we would need this constraint to also be functional, achieve its goal in the case of batch uploads. I'm no expert in this area, but I know that this would be something to bear in mind from a technical standpoint. So is this a reasonable solution? Would guardrails be needed to make sure that this constraint is not used in places where it shouldn't? We'll be talking about that very shortly. Oh, I meant to add a slide and it's not there. A slide saying, is there any other potential solution that we could consider? So that's it. That's our introductory presentation. Simon, before we invite feedback from participants, any further thoughts? Anything that you'd like to add? You're muted. Okay. So, any thoughts in the room? I see that our colleague Bart Magnus from Mimo has joined us. Bart has been devoting countless hours trying to disentangle items. He knows how big of a pain this can be in terms of ensuring data quality. Bart, is there anything else that you'd like to say about this particular issue? I see that most of you have joined as listen-in only. So we can rely on the chat to collect input, but we really want this to be a discussion. So if you feel like using your mic, you can refresh, join again, and choose a means of participation that would allow you to share your thoughts.
Okay, I'll ask. I'm Jarmo from Finland. I really like the idea one-to-one relationships between Wikipedia and Wikidata, but I've also noticed the problem that many people write very long pages, which include many concepts, and in such a case, it might be possible to if you could have identifiers or labels within the page, and then you could kind of, in that way, you could have two links from two different Wikidata items pointing to the same page. If you have some kind of rules, what kind of identifiers you can create there, then you could have several items described in Wikipedia pages. That would be one solution.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's something that Beth has been advocating for. in multiple forums. But so far, I don't think that there's any openness on the part of the Wikipedia user to change into wikilinks. But how would you describe your experience so far in trying to implement this solution? If you can actually speak, because I know that Bart has young children that he may be putting to bed right now. Has anyone else ever engaged in a discussion with the Wikipedia community about allowing one-to-many links?
Well,
maybe do you hear me now, Frédéric?
Yes.
Okay. In the chat, Amy Watsons is saying that it is also a big problem for museum too. I didn't know if you had seen it.
Okay. Amy, would you like to open up your mic to describe how the problem is impacting the museum community? It'd be great to be able to at least document the impact of this conflation upon users. So Amy, I see that you joined as listening only. So you can, if you refresh, you'll be able to select the microphone. And so Amy writes, I'm not on mic, but the conflation of the building with the organization is also very frequent. Same issue with inception date problems. Thanks, Amy.
I could continue a little bit about my problem. So what I'm doing at my work is that I'm trying to link a general ontology with Wikidata, and we have about 30,000 concepts, and they are created in two different languages, in Finnish and Swedish. So we try to create the concepts according to two different cultural things. But when we try to link those concepts with Wikidata, we often run into problems in both linguistic and cultural differences, because in some languages or some cultures you have three concepts and we have only one, or vice versa, that we have one concept and there are three different concepts in Wikidata, and it's very difficult when you try to link these together. So in that case, it would be nice if you could have like more than one external identifier to going to our database, or vice versa. So you could have like a Wikidata item which could have two different external identifiers from the same dataset. We would need that kind of possibility, but now this constraint is to only have one external identifier per dataset. So I don't know if that can be leased out a little bit, but so you have two or three, but not more. But the constraint of having only one is sometimes quite a problem.
Yeah, mind you, I think it is possible to have two IDs, two values for the same ID in one item. It just triggers a constraint,
right?
And I guess you may be able to use qualifier to justify why it's there.
Yeah, we've been doing that. We just added two, and we don't mind the warnings.
Okay. I see that some people are
Can you give us an example in the chat, maybe a link to one example item about what you are seeing?
Oh, I would have to think about that. Let me think. Take me a minute.
There's also Aura Vatras saying that they have the same kind of problem with political data.
Parliamentary and presidential elections that happen at the same time as well. Indeed. I'm wondering, do we have any tech expert developers in the room who might be able to tell us if a constraint that would trigger a violation warning in the case of conflicting P31 values. Is this even technically feasible? I don't know. I'm a young Wikimedian, and I have no expertise in how constraints can be programmed.
Okay, I posted the link now to the report. There are quite many, but you can get an example. The problem is sometimes in the place concepts when Wikidata has only one place, but we have two distinct places when the status of the place changes from, let's say, we put two cities together, for example. So we still keep the old city as a separate concept, and then the new city, which is a joint, or a community is joined into a neighboring city. So we keep the old concept, but in Wikidata there's only one concept for that, for the new status only, and not the old one. Yeah. You see those, a lot of those on the list.
Okay.
Hi, I just raised my hand and I thought perhaps I would chime in if there's a second. This is Jackie Shea. I work with Amy. We are both from the Smithsonian. And the issue we have come across in terms of the building and museum, building could be, say, for example, Natural History Museum. But inside, we also have a learning center. We also have the libraries and archives, part of the libraries and archives. So if an instance for building, we would tend to say Natural History Museum is a museum, instance of a museum, but it is also an instance of building. If we wanted to also have, it has different parts to associate it with different subunits that is not administratively part of the Natural History Museum. It's independent from the museum. And so if we were to do something like this, we are also coming across a lot of inconsistencies in applying this. So we're trying to find a pattern that could satisfy across the board for our environment. And that's, I think, what we are struggling with at the moment. And so I do not know the process, how the constraints get implemented, but we have in a way responded to a lot of our constraint violations. But the difficulty is that to get a community consensus going forward, I think that is hard.
It is. And wiki projects can help define practices that are deemed better by the community. That's definitely what we have been doing in the performing arts with the Wiki Project Performing Arts and the Wiki Project Cultural Venues, which is actually a Wiki project that should technically be shared with the museal sector. In the particular case that you are describing, I would say that both the organization and the building could be subdivided into smaller items. In the case of the organization, you can create different items that are related to the larger organization using the property business division or similar properties. In the case of a building that has many parts, part of is just a great property to be able to describe different parts of the building and link them together. Would that be, is this a reasonable approach, you think, for the museum sector?
Perhaps we haven't really sit down and come up with a work plan, but that is a very good point. It's similar to the work that we've been doing right now with work and different manifestation in the library terminology. That means a different instance. And so we could essentially have an item that is describing the whole entity, and then have several parts in a separate entity, and then somehow get it all connected to this big part. Like what we are doing with the work and edition, the project books project. Thank you for your pointer.
And if I may share an example, I'll screen share and share one item that we had to disentangle that way in Canada. So let me browse to the National Arts Center. So we have the National Arts Center as a performing arts organization and as a center, a building in Ottawa. The building doesn't have yet individual items for its distinct venues, but it was necessary for the National Arts Center organization to be divided in several business divisions, because each of these divisions can act as a presenter or a producer of performing arts productions. And so the NAC as a whole is often referred to as a whole in databases that are about theater, but the actual entity that has presented or produced a play is not the NAC as a whole, but the NAC English Theater, or else the NAC Indigenous Theater. So here's an example of how we dealt with that. Now, this is how the NAC as a whole is, and its parts are represented in Wikidata. Now, do managers of theater and dance database go into this level of granularity? Perhaps not.
Yeah, I think what Amy described in the chat is that oftentimes like in our case, a museum was essentially established, but never really actually built. And then the actual building was officially open. So we have some property that we can use to illustrate the different dates associated with it. So at any rate, we have more work to do. Thank you.
So I'd like to go back to an earlier comment by Emu saying that you can probably put in a constraint disallowing, say, P31 equal building and P31 equal museum. You have to set up a lot of constraints. I don't know how you would actually do. I don't know what that entails. Be curious to know more about this potential solution.
Hi, I'm not an expert on constraints, but I am an administrator. But I think it's fairly easy to just put in a constraint that says if the P31 value is, so let's say, building, you can't also have the P31 value for museum. That's possible, and it's not really that difficult, but I think you'll have to do it for each pair. So museum, building, and I don't know, library and building and stuff like that. And well, the other problem is that few people really care about constraint violations, because it's just a flag there and you can easily ignore it.
Yeah, of course, they can be easily ignored, but at the same time, they can send a signal that there might be a better way to represent information. Would this disallowing constraint, would it be possible to apply it to classes and all of its subclasses, so that we don't have to write hundreds of constraints just for one domain?
I think there is some sort of solution, but we'll have to check with somebody who really knows about constraints. It's not a really popular subject because it's, well, technical and pretty boring at the same time. But I think there are people who could look into that.
Thank you very much. So what would be the best way to get feedback on that? That would be through the project chat then, I would believe so. And Nicola points out constraints can deal with subclasses, but often subclasses are also a mess, mixing different concepts. That's a point, indeed. But at least one convenient thing is with constraints that they can be ignored if if they lead to this kind of a problem. Let me go back into the chat because there's a fair deal of activity. So Amy says we run into issues such as the museum as organization may have been established by the act of US Congress 10 years before the building is constructed. So you have inception date of organization prior to the inception date of building, and it'll be a date of official opening. Indeed, the date of official opening is a great property and it applies only for building. So that removes any ambiguity when that property is used, you know that it refers to the building. However, inception date can also be used to describe the point in time when the construction of a building began, or the plans for constructing the building began. For example, the bill, if let's say it's a national building, then at some point there was a bill that was voted by Congress to say we will build this building. Therefore, the bill could also be considered the inception date for the building. So it is a solution to some issues, but not all. Timothy says there are also many instances where buildings outlast their absolutely original organization. The building may still carry the name of the original organization, but host a new organization or several organizations. Absolutely true. Hence, another reason to create distinct items and state the relationship. Is the organization the owner of the building or just the organization that manages the building? Simon, anything else in the chat that you've seen? I see that you've been interacting with the chat, and rather than trying to make meaning of what you've been exchanging, how about you provide us with a summary?
There is Hahor Stemeyer, sorry for the pronunciation, who's saying that when you have a Wikipedia article who conflating many subjects, you can put in P31 an item saying that the article is covering many subjects. So maybe it is a way to explore. You can create dedicated item on the organization and on the building, for an example, and keep the item, the hybrid item, with the P31Q 214844471 on the hybrid item. Maybe it's a way to solve partly the problem.
And about this thing, interesting approach. I would be interested in the opinion of others here and in the larger community. Merci, Nicolas. Going back to earlier comments, Amy was saying, I'm wondering if sometimes there is confusion on the part of editors inputting data. Some records do not have P31 equal building, but just P31 equal museum. But the statements are about the building rather than the organization. It's likely the case, absolutely. That's why whenever we have been delivering workshops, Wikidata workshops to the performing arts community, we always stress the importance of understanding the building and the organization as two distinct concepts. One thing that, for example, we thought of doing is creating a subclass of organization for festival organization, so that when people type in the word festival, they are being proposed two potential values, one being festival and the other being festival organization. Therefore, it sends a signal, oh, these are two different things. Catching up with the chat. Bert, I see that you're in front of the computer. Do you want to speak up and turn your mic on?
Well, maybe very briefly. I was a bit. I was intrigued by the solution that Hirschmeyer, if I pronounce it correctly, said. But I just wonder. I mean, maybe he or she can explain a bit more about this ID, where it has been used or not, because I can imagine that it has quite some consequences also for querying the data. If you set the P31 to that article covering multiple topics, yeah, how do you see that in terms of querying and in terms of yeah? I can imagine that it may be a solution for the links to Wikipedia articles, because then that can be an article covering multiple topics indeed. But for the sake of querying, I just wonder, has this solution been used already in one field or another?
Yeah, I think there's I don't think there are at the moment any metadata for the Wikipedia pages, like keywords or something, which you could kind of label. The only one are the Wikidata labels, which are the inter-language links. I think that's the only way at the moment. So I don't know if there's any way to add additional labels on the Wikipedia side. So I was thinking more like having links pointing to subtitles, for example, which would have identifiers. So then you could have several links from the Wikidata page to several Wikipedia pages, like you said. But somehow you would have to think what kind of identifiers you would have there on the Wikipedia page. It might not be just the label of the subtitle, or would it be just a random number? I don't know. Think about that.
If that's useful, I may just share one of these items of the results that okay, so I see what it is with no label defined, even quite particular. So that's a good mean of expressing that the Wikipedia article itself conflates many different concepts or entities, but it's not. Would it really help at all in terms of preventing the issue from occurring in the first place? Or at least, sending a signal that this issue has come up. For protected areas, when I use this approach mostly for protected areas when the Wikipedia article conflates different protected areas covering the same area. I'm not sure what you mean by protected areas. I'll let multiple users type in the chat while I will look at the left and right example provided by Simon. And in the meantime, Amy is asking, could there be a constraint violation if a statement for architect is added to an item that is not an instance of a building? That can easily be done, absolutely. In the same fashion, you could use a constraint saying that you know, an organization item should not have a room capacity. So that may help, but then it requires identifying which property applies only to one concept, and then programming the constraint and seeing whether that actually sends strong enough signal for people to wake up and understand that distinct items are needed. I guess a combination of this strategy plus users instructions, possibly pointing to wiki projects where instructions are given as to how to model distinctly, that could help. And that's something that we have attempted to do in the performing arts sector, but we keep, no matter what we do, we keep seeing new conflated items being created, and we have a backlog of items that remain to be disentangled.
Yeah, I just was going to say, as I typed that, I was then wondering if you did put a constraint violation, would someone just add then the instance of building to that item rather than being prompted to create a new item? And so you would just be making the problem worse.
They may. So Paulo says, on relational stuff, I always wonder how we could define how a building is adjacent to another, how a street connects to another. Right now, it does not seem to have a clear way to qualify that. Actually, there exists a property called adjacent building. So that exists in terms, but adjacency of streets, I do not know. When it comes to, I don't know, when it comes to defining connections of streets, maybe OpenStreetMap is a better place for that than Wikidata, and yet Wikidata can help OpenStreetMap by providing items, identifiers that lacks in OpenStreetMap. So Simon pasted a property in the chat, which is likely about, adjacent building. And Simon recommends using qualifiers. Yeah, sure, to qualify with the direction of adjacency. Good point. So Vera says, Portuguese heritage is modeled badly, edits undone after disentanglement, and she is pointing to an item which might be a scary one, but Halloween is tomorrow, so let's have a look at it. Okay, instance of cultural heritage, heliport and hospital. Now, in this case, the heliport would be a part of the hospital, but yet the name has the word heliport in it. But it would still be possible in this case to create a distinct item for the heliport, which would allow specific statements to be made about this part of the building. So far, I see time flying by. We have, I think, 10 minutes left. Amy came up with a kind of solution, which is using a constraint violation, a type constraints, a non constraint on type to prevent a building specific property to be used on an item that is not a building, or vice versa. That could be used, but again, with certain risk that people could just mess up the ontology by adding further P31 or subclasses statements to the classes. I think in terms of what's next to do, we'll have to revisit the suggestion that was made up in the chat about and retrieve it. I should have copied and pasted it. Someone mentioned a disallowing constraint, and we should post that in the project chat and invite comment. Or is this a project chat issue, or is this a request for comment? I'm a new Wikimedian. I need guidance. I don't mind, you know, taking an action item on this, but
I think if you want to get something done, you should never create an RFC. They generally don't work really well. So maybe bring it up in project chat, or just do it and look if somebody disagrees. But RFC is a tedious and long process that normally just gets ignored. At least that's my feeling after 2 years of Wikidata.
okay. So at least we have one action item. So I'll try to summarize this discussion and post it into the chat. And I'll be soliciting input as to how this particular constraint can be programmed using existing the existing toolkit, or if something new has to be programmed. And Paulo says, I think it was already reported many times to the admin board. So are we going to get anywhere? But at least we know that at some point 30 Wikimedians were in that meeting because this was an issue that was impacting them. So yes, that sends a signal to whoever's running the admin board. And Paulo says that he doesn't understand Vera's question.
I think that's an isolated problem regarding, I think, heliports, and it's an interesting and problematic problem, but I don't think it's really connected to our main problem that's covering the whole of Wikidata.
Yeah. Okay, okay. Would anyone volunteer to help me out in getting the discussion going on the project chat? Because there are times, you know, when I start something on the project chat and no one ever responds. Would anyone raise their hand and say, "Hey, Frédéric, I'll give you a hand there"? Well, the project chat is what you can find when you're on the main Wikidata page, but I cannot provide a link to the specific discussion because I have not started it just yet. But if for those who are not aware of where the project chat sits, I think it's a good opportunity to.
Do you want to do it on the Performing Arts project?
We could, but I mean, it's an issue that has an impact on the GLAM sector and on other sectors. So it really belongs to the project chat. So if you are anywhere in Wikidata, in the left side menu, you have main page, community portal, and the project chat. So the project chat is where you can post questions for the community. So in this case, it would be just a generic project chat discussion. I don't see this fitting in like a request for permissions. I don't see where else it belongs beyond project chat. So I'll be just starting a new discussion, summarizing what we talked about today, and and invite feedback. But I cannot believe this. You have never used a project chest yourself. I was looking up at you, Bart, as being the ultimate Wikimedian. Oh gosh, such disappointment. So Amy, I'm gonna drop my username and email address in the chat. And then we can reconnect, can draft this and ask for your input. Before I post it on the chat, English not being my main language, sometimes I don't find the right wording to make my point clear. So perhaps you can help with that. So unless there's anything else, I think we've covered this topic in full. And that says, oh wait, it's just a question of language setting. It's called the Krieg in Dutch. Oh, en français, c'est le bistrot. Lovely. OK, then. Voilà, c'est ça, le bistrot. C'est là qu'on va se retrouver à la fin de la journée. OK, thank you.